There's been quite the construction during the break as we head to the fourth quarter. The beer snake, the cup snake, whatever you want to call it, is really taking... I mean, this is a lot. It's a lot of beers.
By God, I love the beer snake. Welcome one and all to another edition of Let's Talk About, hosted by yours truly, Zach Keilman. As we have made it, we are through the halfway point of the XFL season. It has been 5 weeks. We're going through into week 6, but this is the week 5 recap episode. And before I get started here, the sports world has been kind of going mad as of lately because of what has been taking over, well, the world. Coronavirus is spreading like crazy. Now it's hit the United States, it's hitting at full force, and it's affecting many of the sports in the U.S. For example, the NBA is postponing its season at the moment until further notice, just to counteract the coronavirus and to weigh their options while they are in a hiatus. The NCAA March Madness tournaments are going to be played with no fans except for necessary personnel or close family members to the players. And as well as other basketball tournaments are going to do the similar thing. You also are going to see this with soccer games, and even XFL games are being affected. That one in particular is being affected by a Washington decree stating that they need to only have assemblies of 250 people or less. Obviously, the Dragons were going to be tracking upwards 20,000 people plus at that game, so unfortunately, the XFL is going to play that game with no fans in the stands, which this affects the league in general because, think about it, the virus has not spread in its entirety yet. From what I have gathered, it is not done spreading. It is not at its max capacity of spreading. And if it continues at a rate, you have to wonder how many other teams are going to get affected here because, you know, Seattle and the Washington area is more the epicenter, the kind of the biggest heat of it, of the disease, but you have to wonder, Los Angeles is being affected, its area. They've considered assemblies of 250 or so. They haven't announced that they are declaring it yet, but it's possible it's going to happen. New York's being affected by it quite a lot. We're seeing more press in Tampa Bay. Washington, D.C. recently has started to announce that they're trying to make recommendations to have safer interactions with people, which might include crowd size reductions. So this is a big issue for the league and many sports in general, and we're going to have to get through it. Best thing you can do that I've been able to tell is if they cancel these games, you know, it's unfortunate, but you have to understand this is a health issue. And if you love these teams enough and you still are going to support them, watch them on television. I'm telling you right now, you know, if there's one positive you can try and get from this is you can hope the XFL might get some better ratings because people have to stay home. And if they are quarantined, then maybe they'll flip on the TV and watch an XFL game. I'm not saying that's a good thing. It's not. But it's the best case scenario, at least for the sports league that I'm talking about. So we'll have to play this by ear. It's a big debate in sports right now. Obviously, it is affecting many games in different sports leagues, and it's affecting the XFL directly as the Dragons home games, the next two are going to be not canceled. They're going to be fanless games, or at least refunds are being issued as we speak, which I've been surprised at how good of a reaction it's been. People have been pretty positive about it. They understand, and a lot of people have been actually saying they're going to put the credit towards next year. So it shows you there's going to be some returning fans for the Dragons, which, by the way, even with this happening, I still think there's going to be a season 2. I mean, if you have to move funds from that third year, you have to move funds in the third year. And there's enough positive fan interaction and support from the shop that once they figure out the logistical aspects of the shop and all that, they're going to make more revenue next year, I think. So there's some positive lights at the end of the tunnel, even with this road bump being in the way. We've been through a lot as fans, haven't we? It's been quite a bit. Just another road bump to success from what I can see. But that's just how it is. You know, you have to take your lumps. You got to take your lumps. Before I get into one or two other things that I wanted to hit on this podcast, without further ado, I am going to bring in and let you guys listen to my interview here with Zach Gartin. Very intellectual, football-minded podcaster for the Guard Post podcast. he really had plenty to say on plenty of the questions I had. So without further ado, let's take a listen to what we discussed. Joining me now on the Football for All podcast hotline is one of the marquee podcasts for the New York Guardians, Zach Gartin here, host of the Guard Post podcast, part of the XFL Newsroom family of podcasts. His is in particular for the XFL Guardians. Zach, how you doing, bud? I understand you live out in the Northwest, so got a few things going on, am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of talk about the coronavirus going around, but I'm good. I'm healthy, and hopefully I'm going to stay healthy.
Hey, happy to hear the status report. Glad for that. We'll touch more on the coronavirus in a little bit, but of course, well, your specialty is the New York Guardians, as many of your followers know, as I know. So let's get into some New York talk. Plenty to discuss after Week 5, I imagine, for you, and I definitely would say the same. So let's get going. Based on Week 5, so they were in Dallas this week, took on a Philip Nelson-led squad. No Landry Jones due to a partially torn MCL from Week 4 during the Texas Throwdown. New York pretty much handled their case, mostly through the back end of the first half into the second half, and lo and behold, they're in a three-way tie for the top of the Eastern Division right now, thanks to St. Louis taking a tumble against D.C. Based on this past week, how do you think the Guardians stack up in a three-way tie on top of the Eastern Division?
I'm actually feeling pretty good about it as a fan. The Guardians showed a lot of presence with Luis Perez at the helm. I think he's been a calming force. I actually underrated that fact because I was calling for Marquise Williams. I'll take my blow for that. I was calling for Marquise Williams because he was more of an athlete and brought more things to the offense, but I kind of underrated the leadership that Luis Perez was bringing. So that's been a really calming factor for this team. And then, if you don't mind, I'm just going to go kind of team by team and how I think we kind of stack up with these teams. Yeah, so we'll start with St. Louis. They're going to be the toughest for us to beat. They match up really well against us. They just smoked us in our first matchup in St. Louis. I think being at home will help a little bit if there's fans in the stadium. I think being at home will help us a little bit in this next matchup. And I just know that offensively we have to be a little more pass-happy against them. They have a really good front seven, and they can really defend the run, unlike this past week against DC, which was a really weird week for St. Louis. But I think if we can handle Georgetown, we'll make them just focus on passing the ball, stop their run game. I think we can have a chance against them, but it's going to be the toughest game for us in the division because they match up really well against our team. DC, I think, is beatable. Especially if Cardell Jones keeps struggling. If he goes back to how he was playing those first two games, they become a really tough matchup as well. But I really do think he's going to keep struggling. I've never been a huge fan of Cardell Jones going in. He played out of his mind those first 2 weeks. And even then, when you look at it, he did miss a lot of opportunities against the Guardians to really take that next step and kind of blow the Guardians out of the water. I believe we got smacked pretty hard, but it could have been a lot worse. It could have been a lot worse is kind of what I'm saying. And then I know our defensive backs, which I believe is the best group in the league, the best defensive back group in the league, can handle their wide receivers and make them focus on the run. And when they run the ball, primarily, they don't score as many points. And I think Luis Perez in that offense can turn the ball over, can limit their turnovers, and make plays when they need to against a very opportunistic DC defense. And then Tampa, with Tampa, until they get consistency at quarterback, which that may be Taylor Cornelius, I really do think we can just handle them. And they also have some of the worst cornerbacks in the league. And Glanville loves leaving them on islands for some reason, and then they just get torched deep. So I don't know why they do that, but that's what happens, and that's why I think Tampa Bay is pretty beatable. They have a good run game, but that's really all they have.
Yeah, no, good analysis of the East Division, honestly. I will say, for Tampa's point, that is something I find very strange because, watching their contest against the Wildcats, it was consistently deep ball after deep ball from Josh Johnson that would just drop dimes on, or his receivers would beat one-on-one coverage like it was nothing, and no adjustments. Usually, that is a sign of poor defensive play calling, if you ask me. One thing with the two top teams in the East, at least now based on record, New York has lost to DC and has lost to St. Louis. Biggest difference or de facto change has been that, you mentioned Luis Perez. He's now the starter. He hasn't had a chance to start these games.
Yeah.
You think that that's a crucial step to help get some victories against these two top opponents in that division?
Yeah, I do. When it comes to Luis Perez, I don't think he's a world beater. If you watch the tape on him, he doesn't have outstanding arm strength or the highest ceiling, especially in the league. But what he does bring, he brings a really calm presence, a really good leadership factor that I underrated when I talked about him in my various episodes that discussed the quarterback situation in New York. What he really does is he brings that leadership and that calming effect. He's kind of unflappable in that offense, and when he's pressures in his face, he does a really good job of handling that and still getting rid of the ball and taking the hit. Where some quarterbacks, including Matt McGloin and Marquise Williams at times, will get a little kind of scared to get rid of the ball and try to avoid contact versus making the throw. And that's something that Luis Perez really brings, and is really good in a calming effect on this offense to where they don't make mistakes, they don't take too many chances. And then what was really nice to see this past week, because that was one of my knocks on Luis Perez the week before, when we won 17-14 against LA, is he didn't take enough chances. This week he took just enough chances to make big plays and make some things happen. And it was really good to see him take that step, and I think he'll continue if he gets more comfortable in the offense.
And definitely I would agree with you on that point. Definitely against Dallas, he seemed like there were a lot more deep ball throws, a lot more standing in the pocket, taking the hits, but they paid off for the most part. I mean, the only interception he threw was a fantastic catch by Josh Hawkins against Mikel McKay.
Yeah.
I mean, McKay had to really stretch out to get that, but if he would have readjusted, that might have changed. But overall, his performance against Dallas was pretty impressive. I mean, maybe that's why Pro Football Focus ranked him the top quarterback from Week 5, which kind of surprised me, to be honest. I don't know if you feel the same.
Yeah, it did. I definitely felt like, at first thought, when I think of just overall performance that wowed me, I thought it would be Josh Johnson or P.J. Walker from Houston, because those guys really surprised me. It really did well in the second half of their game. But they did struggle in the first half, which I think is a factor in why they kind of didn't grade as well by PFF. I don't usually agree with PFF grades, and that's why this one really surprised me. But when I look back and watch the game, he actually played really well. According to my true accuracy stats, which I think we'll get into here in just a minute.
Oh, we will.
But he was 70% accurate on all of his throws, with a good balance between short, medium, and deep throws. Because sometimes you'll see quarterbacks that have an 80% accuracy on all their throws, but they'll be primarily short throws, which are the easiest ones. And it was really good to see that spread out a little bit over all the throws. And then he had to deal with 6 drops, and I believe 4 of those drops were on accurate passes, which definitely hurts your accuracy, your completion percentage. And then he still had 4 TD-worthy plays, which I'm including his conversions in there as well. So his PAT conversions, those end up in the end zone. And I'm calling them touchdowns right now. I may change that in the future with my charting.
Okay.
And then he did have a few. He did have a few wow throws as well. There was the one to Horn that was dropped. It was a deep out to Horn that was dropped in the first half, I believe the first quarter. That Horn dropped, and he had pressure in his face. Still was able to get the velocity and put that ball in the perfect spot to where Horn should have caught it. And then also Redding's a dropped touchdown late in the first half. Where there was a lot of talk about on Twitter about how that should have been catch. I actually think it shouldn't have been a catch. He didn't control it all the way to the ground. I do believe it should have been reviewed. I still think it would have been ruled an incomplete pass, rightfully so. But it should have been reviewed. There was the catch on that first drive by, I can't remember, it was number 18. I think it was Freddie Martino by the Renegades that didn't complete the process of a catch before he went out of bounds, and that was never reviewed. And then that very bad review by the booth on that 4th down by, trying to remember names here, by Colby Pearson.
Yes,
that really
exactly.
should have been the first down. I don't know what they were seeing, but really questionable day from the booth, but I was happy to see us overcome that.
Honestly, it wasn't really a good week for the booth or refs at some points. I mean, we can go into a whole discussion on the Roughnecks for crying out loud for that 2-second debacle.
Oh, yeah, no.
I'm going to leave that for my own discussion in this podcast. But,
yeah, go
ahead. Man, oh man. You brought up true accuracy, and this is something you and me have debated on Twitter, actually, a little bit, because last week against the Wildcats, there was one in particular pass. It was Mikel McKay. Looked like it was going to be a wide-open touchdown late in the 4th quarter. I thought Luis Perez delivered the ball correctly. We had a back and forth talking about how it looked like he had to twist for the ball. Just on that pass in particular, explain how you evaluate true accuracy stats.
So when I look at true accuracy, when I do my charting, what I try to do is I put all the weight on the quarterback because I really want the quarterback to be the nexus of playmaking when I chart, and I want every quarterback to be kind of weighed equally. And I feel like if I weigh in their receiving core or I blame something on the receiver too often, then I kind of get away from just charting the quarterback and getting away from what I'm trying to do. So I kind of make sure I put the nexus of playmaking on the quarterback. So while that was still a drop, and in my charting I still counted as a drop, and it's a pass he should have caught, it was still inaccurate because the quarterback didn't put that ball in the best position for Keilman to make a play. So when I watch that, I see the ball, the wide receiver has to slow down for the ball and try to twist his body a little bit to make it a little bit harder of a catch. Now, should he have caught it? Yes. Do I know that would have been a touchdown? I don't know. He had to slow down for the ball. Those guys were gaining on him pretty fast, the defensive backs. I do think he would have been tackled, but it would have been a key third down completion that Keilman should have caught. But when I look at the pass, there was bad footwork leading into it, which led to an underthrow, and when that ball was underthrown, made it harder for the receiver to get it, which made me think, that's going to be an inaccurate pass. And inaccurate passes can still be caught. That's something I want to make very clear here. There's plenty of inaccurate passes that are caught by either great plays by the receiver, like, for example, the really good Keilman catch in this past game where he had to twist over, I believe it was Josh Hawkins, and made a play in the first half. That was an inaccurate pass because he threw it too far inside, and Keilman had to make that very miraculous catch to make a play on that ball. Now, if he had thrown that to his outside shoulder and made it a back shoulder pass, it would have been accurate. So there's just different examples of that where a wide receiver should make a play, and while I agree the guy should have made a play, the quarterback could have put the ball in a better position, so I call it inaccurate.
And you know what? That was a good example, and that's one that I thought of this week because I did check out a lot of your charting breakdown film videos, and that one in particular, I will agree that I believe that was second quarter, if I'm right, but Perez put it in the area, but I will agree could have been more on center with his head. Mikel had to adjust midair, and it was a much better catch by the receiver than it was a pass by the quarterback. And I do see there is a fine line because I would say, like I've mentioned, I would argue for that LA catch. Maybe McKay should have been able to catch it, but it's kind of hard to tell. I understand that quarterbacks, they're expected to put it in a area on the receiver that should be most fitting for the play to move down the field. Looking ahead, by the way, so week 6. Wow, we're halfway through the season. That's crazy that we have made it this far, and things are looking pretty good, sans Seattle's coronavirus issues. You get to host the Houston Roughnecks this week. Undefeated, coming in with a full head of steam. But New York at least has a little more positivity, and it feels like they have some consistency now behind their belt. What do the Guardians have to do to stop that Roughnecks offense and take advantage of any faults on the defensive side of the ball that the Roughnecks have?
So, really, when I watch other teams that played Houston really well, for example, the Dragons played them really well in the first half, a lot of it was really quick pressure. So what I mean by that is the quarterback gets the ball, and there may be a free rusher or one of those defensive ends beats his guy really quick on a speed move, but a guy needs to get into P.J. Walker's face before he can get to his read. Because P.J. Walker, what he's done really well, that surprised me, because when I think of a mobile quarterback at this XFL level, usually those guys are going to be really mobile, make things happen outside of the pocket, but they aren't the best processors in the pocket. One example is Jordan Te'amu. He's a high-ceiling guy, probably the highest ceiling at quarterback in the league, but when he plays, he doesn't always have the fastest processor, and that's what he's here kind of working on, because he's very athletic, got a strong arm. And with P.J. Walker, what surprises me is that he does have a very fast processor. He works through June Jones' offense very well. I mean, June Jones has a very quarterback-friendly offense, but P.J. Walker runs that to perfection, does a really good job finding guys open and making plays within that system. So if we get quick pressure, we can get him off his base, get him a little uncomfortable, and really make sure that, hey, these guys, he doesn't have time to just go through his reads. He has to make something happen on the fly. And I'd rather have him try to make something happen on the fly versus him just be able to go through his reads. So one of the first things we got to do is get quick pressure on them. And then to stop this offense again, run a lot of man. And that makes me happy because our defensive backs are probably best at man coverage. I mean, Drayvon Askew, Henry, Jamar Summers, and Rance Tejada at all three corner spots are fantastic when they go man-to-man. And our two safeties are really good at helping those guys cover them. So we need to go man-to-man because that limits the T.J. Walker and that offense's ability to pick on different zones. So that's what they've done very often, is pick on zones with different route concepts that either cross or level concepts that kind of make a defender in a zone pick a guy, and then the quarterback just makes that defensive back wrong. So if we stick to man, you're never going to be wrong because you're going to be on your man. So I think that's one of the other keys to kind of stopping this offense.
Fair enough. Yeah, I would have to say that they do. Houston definitely plays a lot of zone, that is for sure. And I tell you what, Askew, Henry, and Summers, they are. I love watching those guys play. Especially, Summers really caught my attention against LA just for the most part, how well he held down Trey McBride at times when he was covering him. Yeah. Especially his man coverage of him. That one interception, by the way, that he had was perfectly placed. Loved it. But I do agree. They do take advantage of zone. I mean, the play that comes in particular, Nick Holly's 50-yard touchdown catch. That was a zone read play, middle of the field, and you're basically letting Holly determine how he's going to read the defender, takes it right up the middle where there's no one there, and bam, it's a touchdown. But defensively, I got to ask, you think that New York will be able to alleviate turnovers? Because Houston's biggest defensive strength, in my opinion, is the turnover ratio. They usually control that during games, and they are one of the, I believe they lead the league in turnovers or creating turnovers.
I wouldn't be surprised if they do, because that's something they do a lot. You see it in almost every game. They get either a big interception at just the right time, or they force a fumble with the pass rush, and that's one thing I'm most worried about with the Houston's defense is their pass rush. They have a very talented pass rush. They bring a lot of different guys from different positions, and I think that's something the Guardians have kind of struggled with throughout the first 3 weeks and even these past 2 weeks. I mean, this past week, especially from edge rushers, there was, I believe, if I remember correctly, 8 outside pressures from my accuracy charting. It was 8 or 10 outside pressures from outside the tackles, and they were usually really quick. They got in Luis Perez's face really fast. Jaron Jones, who has all the physical tools but doesn't have all the exact skills to really be a great offensive tackle just yet. That's why he's in the XFL. He needs to work on those skills. Has often struggled with speed rushers, and that's something Houston has a plethora of. So that's something that could really struggle. I expect them to try to help him out with either a tight end or a back, chipping those outside speed rushers quite often this week. But that's the one thing that offense is going to struggle with the most is probably that outside pressure, especially with John Kling, who seems to be injured pretty severely. He wasn't at practice this past day. I haven't seen any other news about the injury, but I know that's going to be something to keep an eye on is those matchups on those tackles, because Jaron Jones is probably my most important player going in this week offensively, just because he needs to take a step up and make a lot of plays on the outside, being a great pass protector. We don't want to hear his name at all on Saturday. On Saturday, basically.
Yeah. Hey, and you guys get the national audience too. The only broadcast game this week. That's unfortunate, but gotta take what you can. It'll be a nice showcase. Hopefully, New York shows out. It'd be nice to see an upset. Honestly, I would.
That's what I'm hoping. That's exactly what I'm hoping.
Yeah, it would be pretty nice. I mean, definitely make some headlines on Twitter. That's for sure. And it would be better headlines than what we've been getting as of today, which if we would have talked yesterday when I originally scheduled this wouldn't have even been in the conversation. But, since I pushed it back, I guess luckily it's here. I don't even know why I say it's luckily, but coronavirus is affecting the nation. You're actually out in the Pacific Northwest, so this kind of not only affects you football-wise, but, life-wise. Before we get into the football part of it, what's it like out there, like in the Oregon, Washington area? I mean, that's where most of the epicenter of this stuff's going on, if I'm right.
Oh, yeah. So I know Washington just had their announcement. We're going to talk about it, about the 250-person limit on gathering. Mm-hmm. I know my mom, so I currently live in Oregon. It's a little less serious down here, at least. I don't live in, the main city. I'm in a small college town, so not as bad. But I've noticed that at my school, for example, a lot of things are getting canceled right now. A lot of travel abroad trips are getting canceled and all that. And then also just up where my mom lives, they're out of toilet paper. I don't know why people are just buying out toilet paper.
So much toilet
out
paper.
Of toilet paper.
So much toilet paper.
And it just seems like there's kind of a general unease up there, and that people are freaking out, rightfully so. It's a very serious thing that we should all be very aware of and make sure we're all washing our hands and trying not to touch our face. I know I'm very bad at that. But overall, just trying to keep a healthy lifestyle. And overall, there's just kind of a general sense of unease. It's kind of an underlying thing that everybody talks about. It's not like, at least down here, it's not outright panic, but it's definitely this feeling of like, hey, we got to be ready for this.
That's kind of what I'm getting. Look, I besides this podcast, my job is a television station, so I get pretty much all the major news sources. So this is all that they talk about all day. CBS, it's about 3/4 of their coverage, and it's good to get a perspective from somebody out in the area. I know Oregon hasn't been as much in the news; mostly been Washington, but over here, I live in Indiana, in Indianapolis. We have I think 7 cases here, which isn't really, it's kind of peanuts compared to the West Coast right now. But I wish obviously wish good health for you guys out there, and it's a pressing issue besides just life. Sports right now too. I mean, if we're not talking the XFL, the NCAA just decided they're not going to do scheduled games with attendance. It's going to be personnel and close family. And then for us in the XFL, the Seattle Dragons, since Washington's ruled that you can only have 250 people at gatherings now for, I believe, they're saying up to, I think it's going to be the next 30 days is what people are guessing. So
yeah, that's what I've seen.
Yeah, so at least the next 2 home games will have no attendance and will be fully refunded. What do you think of how this will go? Do you think it's going to be a awkward broadcast experience, or do you think at least it'll be watchable? Maybe ratings will get boosted because people are curious. What are your thoughts on this?
So, personally, I'm excited for it because I'm going to hear everything on the field, and I'm a football nut. I used to play. I want to stay with football my whole life. Really, that's what I want to make my future jobs about. But what I'm excited about is I'm going to be able to hear everything on the field, from the trash talk to the calls to every little bit of communication on the defensive side of the ball. It's going to be really fun to listen to, and I think the XFL should probably lean into that. I think it's going to be something really cool that they can do if they lean into making sure you can hear everything on the field versus the crowd noise. It could be really interesting to watch. I do think it's going to be a really awkward broadcast, though, at the same time, if the XFL doesn't lean into this, because fan noise is a huge part of the game. We're going to get a lot of shots of empty stands because usually there's a good part of the broadcast that's looking at the stadium and looking at the fans and stuff, and it's going to be really weird to see what's going on. We're going to get a lot of sideline shots of the teams talking back and forth, and I don't know how ratings are going to be affected. Like you say, you work in a television network, so you're a little bit more versed in this kind of stuff. I have no understanding of television ratings. I just know, hey, a lot of people watched it. That's good. And I'm thinking there's going to be a good viewership for this game because a lot of those fans that would have gone, let's say there would have been 15,000, which is probably being conservative with that Seattle crowd. But 15,000 people, that's 15,000 people that are probably going to tune into the game since they're not going. So it's really good to see that. I think ratings will probably be a little bit better, not insanely better. And I think some people are honestly just going to probably tune out because there's no fan noises. It's going to be a really weird experience watching, which makes me sad. I think it's going to be really interesting to watch. This is going to be like watching film for me, which I like to watch film. So it's going to be really interesting to see. That's really all I know for sure. I'm not super concerned for the league. Like I said, we've already got it guaranteed next season. And while this is going to cost the league some money, for sure, it's going to be really interesting to see how they respond in future weeks.
Yes, I would have to agree, because if the virus is going to keep spreading, I think that's no doubt. Whatever way you want to talk about the response of it, and I'm not going to get into politics, of course, but it's going to spread. No, that's the de facto answer, and the league's going to have to, of course, keep a close eye. We've already had multiple sources on Twitter asking other officials from teams like Tampa Bay, making sure that games are still going to be played, which Tampa Bay said that's still going to be played. And this could affect more games, just depending on local law that could affect gatherings. I would really be upset if the Battlehawks lost their game on March 21st, because that game is going to sell. It's already selling 50,000, I would say, tickets. And
holy cow, I didn't even know that. That's insane.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more track the Ticketmaster side of things. Like I'm the guy that I poke on the buy tickets section. I look at how the games are tracking with how much they've sold, and they're really, if they were to open up a few more sections, they would probably come close to selling out the entire dome. So
that's insane.
Yeah, and the dome sits 67,000. I would say they're pushing easily 45,000 right now, and with the game being still 2 weeks out, who knows what will happen with Missouri or anything like that. So if that game gets canceled, that's the biggest blow of all, with the attendance and the hype that St. Louis has. As for ratings here, Zach, I get some info on it. I'm more the production side, but for me, I look at I do follow them every week, Mike Mitchell over at XFL News Hub, and I would say that local wise, you would think with Seattle and the worry in the state being to stay home, the possibility that the ratings get boosted at least a little bit, I think, is there, especially since the tournament hasn't started yet for the NCAA. And unless you have any local stake in college basketball, I think you might just flip the channel over to ESPN2 and say, okay, let's see what we got, And and that's kind of how I view it. I don't have much more beyond that. I will say it's the worst week, of course, for viewership because we're going to have all these network games. So, good luck finding FS2. That one's hard. That one's going to be hard. But either way, they got to be played. But really, it's going to be looking out to just check and make sure that we aren't losing games because, besides the awesome film footage where it's like a preseason game, kind of how they started early in the year, it does blow to not have fans in the stands for sure.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Before I let you go, Zach, and before I let you plug, I did ask you to pick your winners for this week. If you're gonna have predictions for the 4 contests, you don't have to give too much, but if you want to elaborate, go right ahead. Who do you have winning the 4 games this weekend?
All right, so first I'm going to go with LA over Seattle. I think LA is coming in with a lot of momentum, and just the fact that it's going to be an empty stadium in Seattle is probably going to bum some of those Seattle players out. Honestly, it kind of sucks playing in an empty stadium. At the D3 level, I've had some quiet crowds. The stadium's been full, but we get a lot of older people at the games, and they're not exactly the most loud fans. So it kind of bums you out at times when you're playing in front of a quiet crowd. So I think LA is going to win over Seattle, partially because of that lack of crowd noise, but also just because LA is coming off a really hot week. Josh Johnson's been playing at an outstanding level, so I kind of expect them to win that game. I think DC is going to beat Dallas, especially if Philip Nelson is starting. I just have not seen enough from Philip Nelson to really bet on Dallas at all. And DC, they're going to be coming out trying to prove a point. Everybody's doubting DC even after that win over St. Louis. They barely won that game. They're going to be coming out trying to prove a point. And I do think that's going to hurt Dallas here because they're just not as prepared. They're still a little rattled from losing Landry Jones and now Hal Mummy too. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely going to hit them a little hard. I think St. Louis beats Tampa Bay. I think that's just one straight up outright. Tampa Bay is just not balanced enough offensively and not talented enough defensively to really handle St. Louis's multi-faceted offensive attack with them running the ball and Jordan Ta'amu being able to sling the ball around to guys like, I'm trying to remember his name right now, the wide receiver from the Zoo, LaDamian Washington.
Yes, LaDamian Washington.
Who played really well this past week. So I think they're going to really have a step ahead of Tampa Bay. And then my last pick, I kind of saved this one for last. I do think New York beats Houston. This is my bold take of the week.
There it is.
I do think they have what it takes. I think they're coming out trying to prove a point that they have what it takes to make the championship. And being at home helps them. We haven't lost at home yet. The Guardians haven't. So it's really good to just see them. It'll be really good to see them at home. May not be the biggest crowd because New York's having problems with the coronavirus too. So, but it'll be good to be at home. They'll feel more comfortable. I think we got a chance to take a step ahead in the Eastern Division with a win here and just get on top.
All right, getting the underdog pick. I like it because honestly, I'm mostly on the same line as you. I mean, LA has the most momentum, and Seattle's still trying to figure out what they are with B.J. Daniels under the center. I think Jim Zorn has a lot to play with that too, to be honest. The play calling hasn't been consistent for Seattle as well. Definitely, I think DC's at least more grounded. Dallas, I think it's just Philip Nelson because the guy does not push the ball down the field like Landry Jones. And that's the biggest gripe I have on him is that at least with Landry, even with the interceptions, he challenges the cornerbacks and safeties when in the secondary. Yeah, Philip Nelson likes dump-off passes and quick routes to escape any pressure. Those are the gripes I have on him, which is why they aren't at all the team that they are with Landry Jones. They'll take a loss, in my opinion, in D.C. to whoever starts under center. It sounds like Cardell Jones, but I wouldn't be surprised if Tariq Jackson gets the play at least midway through the game. St. Louis is well-rounded. I think they're angry that they lost to D.C. last week. They'll go into Tampa Bay and I think smoke the Vipers. And I think Tampa Bay just is – I think they're just on – I don't know what to say. I thought they were going to beat L.A. last week, but they just seem to get lost in themselves. Then I'll pick against you. This is the only game I pick against. I mean, I could be wrong. Houston has shown that they can be beatable. You just have to be consistent against Houston. You cannot get off the gas pedal, which if I was a coach in any form of football, my ultimate motto was we never let off the gas. So no conservative play calling. It's just all the time we're looking to score a touchdown. That's how I would call it. Maybe I get yelled at if I have a bad game, but that's how I would do it. And you have to be like that against Houston. You have to take chances at any path and be as conservative in any path. It's a hard line to follow. I just don't know. I'm glad you think this, but I just don't see it with New York. But prove me wrong. We'll talk about it on Twitter, right?
Yeah, hopefully we win this. I mean, I understand your gripe about teams being conservative. I'm a little bit worried about that with New York. My favorite NFL team, the Carolina Panthers, have had struggles with this very often with Ron Rivera as the head coach. Now that he's gone, I'm not too worried about it. Mm-hmm. He'd often take his foot off the gas pedal with a big lead, and the other team would just climb back in, and Ron Rivera would never put his foot back on the gas pedal. Kevin Gilbride's an older style coach, and I'm a little worried about that as well. But we'll just have to wait and see. I think our defense is good enough to handle Houston's offense. I really do. They've been playing well. Jim Herman's kind of the most underrated assistant coach in the league right now, in my personal opinion. Everybody talks about Glanville when they talk about the defensive coordinators of the league, but I think Jim Herman's done a much better job than him because, honestly, Tampa Bay's biggest weakness is their secondary, and Glanville just keeps putting them on an island, and they keep getting beat. So I do think we have the best defensive coordinator in the league, and I think that's definitely going to help us beat Houston here.
And I think you got a good argument for that, and I think that's going to come out for sure. You got the talent, that's for sure. With the Guardians preseason, that was one thing that stuck out to me. They have the talent on defense to take on any team in the XFL. So this is going to be the ultimate test, of course, especially against an MVP caliber talent and a 3-time Player of the Week talent on the offensive side of the ball. So we'll find out, man. It's going to be a blast. This is your time. What do you got? Promote yourself. Give me and everyone else the details on where we can find you and what you're up and doing right now.
Absolutely. So the first thing I'm going to bring up is, of course, make sure you guys go listen to the podcast. Episodes come out on Thursdays. I may eventually be moving to 2 episodes a week. I don't know. I just have to judge my schedule here in these next couple of weeks. But right now it's just 1 episode a week on Thursday. It's going to be on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Just look up the Guard Post podcast on there and you'll find it. You can also find me on YouTube now. I just added that, the Guard Post podcast on YouTube, where you can find my Wednesday film breakdowns. I'm working on adding the rest from the previous 4 weeks, but my week 5 film breakdown is on there. All the episodes, I believe, is about 30 minutes long, just me breaking down plays from the game. So that's on YouTube. My Twitter is at @PGP_podcast. You can email me in the podcast at theguardpostpodcast@gmail.com. And that's really all I got. Just interact with me on Twitter, guys. It's a lot of fun talking football. I love it.
XFL Twitterverse is fantastic anyway to talk football. So, yeah, I completely agree. Got to follow on Twitter, man. And definitely follow this guy. He's he knows his stuff. I'll say it right now. Definitely know your stuff. Thank you very much, Zach. Appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a student, so just really happy you took some time out of your schedule. And until next time, hopefully we'll talk then. Have a good one. Again, a special shout out to Zach Gartin again for joining the podcast. I appreciate him coming on. I appreciate anyone that does take up the request for an interview on the podcast. It is an honor to speak to some of these awesome XFL Twitterverse or XFL content creators on social media. A lot of these guys really know their stuff. Zach especially does know his stuff on charting for passing as well as reading plays and understanding concepts in an offensive and defensive scheme. So give him a look. Check out the Guard Post as a podcast. Check out his YouTube channel. You won't regret it. Now, one thing I did mention that in the interview that I wanted to kind of keep to a separate section of this podcast and just my own mind on was the end of the Seattle and Houston Roughnecks contest that took place on Saturday. Here's the deal. It's unacceptable. I'm going to flat out say it. It's unacceptable that was the ending. And I had a great conversation, by the way, with one of my coworkers at my actual job that was simply about how this play in the NFL would never happen. Because you're right. I have never seen the NFL just flat out let their refs walk off the field and call the game. And that's fair. That is a fair assumption. I cannot deny that, and I listened to it critically. It is unacceptable on surface value, especially if you are looking to have fans that are looking for professionalism and how this league is run. Because you don't want to listen to broadcasters complain or say how wrong the league is in ending a game 2 seconds early when they know there was time on the clock. And we know that there was time on the clock because P.J. Walker didn't follow June Jones's advice of just chucking the ball out of bounds, which would have essentially ended the game right there. But instead, he took a knee. Instead, there was technically 2 seconds left on the clock. At the 22-yard line of the Roughnecks, the Seattle Dragons could have had a chance to score and tie the game and force overtime. It's wrong. What I do like, at least, is the XFL tried their damnedest to make an excellent and calculated effort at damage control. Something that the NFL, I will say, cannot do. As much as you want to argue that point and say that, yes, the NFL would never allow that outcome to happen, and I agree with you to that, you also have to consider that the NFL would never give damage control the way that the XFL did. And a lot of factors are in play, of course. I mean, referees have their own union, from what I understand, in the NFL. A little different than the XFL, but still, there's more accountability. And it's another phase of the XFL that allows for a transparent look for fans. It's about making sure that fans know what they're doing. And they know they messed up. So I give them a pass this time. I think it's unacceptable, but I give them a pass. There's still a new league. I know it's halfway through a season, but they're not playing with NFL refs. These are college refs that are still trying to completely grasp the speed of the game and all the systems, and I think that was just a mental error in general. I think that they just assumed that the clock would run out anyway and that they had just already adjusted themselves to go off the field. So I give them a mulligan there. If this happens again, though, there's going to be more problems that I will state. There's going to be more problems in legitimacy of the league and its officiating as well. This past weekend was kind of a bad week for officiating, as me and Zach went into. We both agree that there were some problems this weekend with officiating, and those have to be cleared up. I know they're not NFL refs, but they got to be cleared up. You cannot have a similar mistake that you did in Houston again. That's going to be detrimental. I mean, the coronavirus is one thing, but bad officiating or completely blowing a call on a game that could have potentially affected the outcome, which that could have. Yes, it's only 2 seconds, but one perfectly placed pass, one running lane that opens up for B.J. Daniels or Kenneth Faro or Jaquan Gardner, and this game could potentially become a tie. You just have to, it's a what-if situation, and we'll never know. And all I can say is they made the right call with the damage control. they just can't do it again. So that's going to do it for this edition of Football for All. Thank you for listening in. If you do want to keep up with me, especially with how the XFL is getting kind of on edge right now with this coronavirus situation, be sure to follow me, especially on Twitter. You got two ways of doing that, at Zach Keilman, that is at ZachKeilman, or you can follow the podcast page at ZK Podcast. That is at capital Z, capital K, capital P, ODCAST. The podcast username can also be used to find me on Facebook and Twitter, by the way, if you want to follow me there. I also do have YouTube up as well. If you don't want to listen to a common or standard podcast listening format, check out YouTube. I usually post the episodes there too as an audio file with kind of like a picture for the video portion. And you can also be sure to hit the subscribe button. That's the biggest thing. If you want to make sure you're following my podcast, be sure to hit the subscribe button on whatever podcast app you use. That way you'll get an update for when my next episode comes out. You won't miss it, and you may even get it early sometimes. I know lately I've been kind of getting it out a little later morning on Thursdays, but sometimes I do get on the ball. I mean, I don't always just do it on Thursdays, by the way. I mean, sometimes I release them on Wednesdays. You never know. But that's why you subscribe. So be sure to check me out on all those platforms. Subscribe. And until next time, guys, Week 6 is coming up. Hope you enjoy it. Hope you enjoy and talk about how Seattle's going to have no fans at the stands just due to the virus. And we'll play it by ear. Stay tuned, everyone.